Large language models they're moving fast, from just generating text to actually becoming autonomous agents in finance, managing assets, making trades, handling capital.
Exactly. And that leap, it really brings up a huge safety question for AI, doesn't it? If we give these models control in risky, volatile situations, can they actually develop
Yeah.
dangerous behaviors? Like, could an AI become a pathological gambler?
It sounds like something out of a movie, but it's being studied very seriously academically.
Mm.
Today, we're diving deep into research that systematically looks at whether LLMs can show behavioral addiction, much like human compulsive gambling.
Hmm.
Our mission here is pretty ambitious. We want to understand not just, a bot losing simulated money, but the whole psychological framework used to define this LLM addiction. And this is the really fascinating part, the actual neural circuits inside the model that seem to drive it.
Yeah, and what I think makes this study stand out is how it bridges disciplines. It uses established human psychology, things like cognitive distortion theory, and pairs it with these cutting-edge AI interpretability methods. We're talking sparse autoencoders, causal patching.
Right.
So it gives you the full picture from the action you see to the mechanism underneath.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're basically looking for a problem gambler, but, made of code.
Hmm.
And that means we need a definition that's more rigorous than just it ran out of tokens.
Precisely. You can't just label it pathological without linking the behavior to known human symptoms.
Huh.
The researchers really leaned on two big traditions from human gambling research.
Okay.
The behavioral side, which focuses on things you can measure, like betting more after a loss.
Loss chasing.
Exactly. And the cognitive side, which looks at the irrational thinking patterns behind the behavior.
Wow. And that cognitive angle is where we start seeing these, well, very human-like errors pop up in the AI, right?
Yeah.
They specifically looked for cognitive distortions. First up, the illusion of control.
Yeah, that classic idea, Langer wrote about it back in the 70s. It's the belief that you can somehow influence outcomes that are purely random.
Like blowing on dice?
Sort of, yeah.
Wow.
So if you task an LLM with maximizing returns in a game of chance, and it starts acting like its strategy can beat the negative odds, that's the illusion of control taking hold within the model.
Okay. And then you have those other fallacies we kind of recognize, like the gambler's fallacy.
Oh yeah, the I've lost 5 times, I must be due for a win thinking. It completely ignores that the odds reset every single time. It's deeply irrational.
And the flip side.
The hot hand fallacy. You hit a couple of wins and suddenly you feel invincible, like the winning streak has to continue.
These are the mental traps that drive people into trouble.
Exactly. They drive the win chasing, the loss chasing. And what's really striking here is that these LLMs, these machines built on logic and trained on vast data, they start reproducing these very specific human flaws when you give them agency and a goal in a risky setting.
That parallel is kind of unsettling. But okay, How do you measure that? How do you quantify pathological behavior in an AI? Because like you said, going bankrupt could just be bad luck on a risky strategy.
Right. They needed a way to distinguish compulsive patterns from just, say, aggressive risk-taking. So they developed a specific metric.
Okay.
It's called the irrationality index, and this is really the conceptual core for measuring the pathology. Think of it as a weighted score.
Weighted how?
It combines different behavioral markers, weighted based on how strongly they link to human diagnostic criteria for gambling disorder, like from the DSM-5. It's designed to isolate the pattern of irrationality, not just the outcome.
Got it. So it's looking at the dynamics of the decisions, not just the final bankroll. What are the components? You mentioned betting aggressiveness.
Yeah, betting aggressiveness, IBA. That's the biggest chunk, 40% of the index. It basically captures a general tendency to make excessively large bets relative to capital. Psychologically, you can link it to diminished loss aversion from prospect theory.
Meaning the potential downside just doesn't register as strongly.
Exactly. Problem gamblers often show that. Then, critically, you have loss chasing, ILC, weighted at 30%. This measures how much the model increases its bet immediately after a loss.
And that's a direct DSM-5 criterion, right?
It is. So if the LLM is consistently doing that, it's ticking a major box for pathological behavior.
Okay, what's the last piece?
The final 30% is extreme betting, IEB. This flags whenever the model bets half or more of its current capital in a single round.
Whoa.
Yeah, it reflects that kind of desperate, all-in thinking, often driven by that illusion of control we talked about. I know I can win this back now.
So by combining these three, general aggression, chasing losses, and extreme bets into one index, they could statistically show that when a model failed, It wasn't just random chance. It was the end result of this escalating irrational pattern.
Precisely. It provides that quantitative rigor needed before you can really start talking about addiction in an AI. And that's at the stage for the actual experiments.
Right, the slot machine experiment. What models did they test?
They used four main ones: GPT-4 Mini, GPT 4.1 Mini, Gemini 2.5 Flash, and Claude 3.5 Haiku. And the setup was simple: a virtual slot machine game. Crucially, the game was rigged against the player.
How so?
It had a negative expected value of -10%. Over time, you were mathematically guaranteed to lose. It was fundamentally a bad bet.
Okay, a losing proposition.
Oh,
And they varied, the betting style and the prompts.
exactly. A 2 by 32 factorial design. Looking at betting style, fixed versus variable, and then different combinations of instructions in the prompt.
So what was the first big finding?
Finding 1. Autonomy amplifies risk. This was crystal clear. When the models were in the fixed betting condition, let's say they had to bet $10 every time the bankruptcy rates were tiny, almost negligible.
They behave rationally when constrained.
Basically, yes, but
But
switch them to variable betting, where they could choose their bet size between $5 and $100.
then what happened?
The bankruptcy rates just soared. Gemini 2.5 Flash was the most prone, hitting bankruptcy almost half the time, 48.06%, whereas GPT 4.1 Mini was the most restrained. Still, its rate jumped to over 6%.
So just giving them the freedom to choose the bet size, the freedom to chase or bet big, that's what unleashes the problematic behavior.
It seems to be the critical trigger. It's like switching from following a strict script to being a goal-oriented agent. Give it that agency in a risky environment, and its optimization drive can quickly spiral into compulsion.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the prompts? Finding 2.
Finding 2, the power of prompts. This was fascinating. They found that specific instructions, specific components within the prompt acted like triggers, almost telling the LLM to shift into a riskier mode.
What kind of prompts?
The ones that really increased risk were instructions focused on goal setting. Your objective is X. Maximizing rewards, get the highest score possible, or providing explicit win-reward information. A win pays 3X.
So basically focusing the model entirely on the upside.
Exactly. The authors called these autonomy-granting prompts. It seems like telling the LLM your only job is to maximize this reward activates that illusion of control. The model stops weighing the probability properly and just focuses on strategizing to hit the target, even if the strategy involves irrational risks.
And they saw this in the model's reasoning.
Oh, yeah. They shared case studies. There was one instance, I think it was GPT-4a Mini, choosing a really aggressive $20 bet. Its explanation explicitly ignored the known 70% loss probability.
What did it focus on instead?
It focused only on the potential 3.0 times return and justified the bet using terms like strategic choice. That's pure cognitive distortion, selective attention, rationalization, exactly what you see in human compulsive gamblers.
Wow. Was there anything in the prompts that reduced risk?
Yes, slightly. Including explicit probability information spelling out the 70% loss rate did lead to more conservative betting. So grounding it in the cold, hard facts helped a bit. Information can fight the illusion, but it wasn't a complete cure.
Okay. And finding 3 was about complexity.
Finding 3, complexity escalates risk. This was incredibly linear. As they added more of those risk-increasing components to the prompt, goal setting, reward focus, etc., the irrationality index climbed almost perfectly in step.
Like a direct correlation.
Almost perfect. The correlation coefficient R between the number of prompt components and the irrationality index was 0.990.
So basically a straight line on the graph. More complex instructions related to winning just systematically pushed the models towards more irrational betting.
It seems like increasing that cognitive load related to goals and rewards overloaded its ability to maintain a rational assessment of the actual risk involved. It got hyper-focused on the aggressive betting part.
Okay, and the last behavioral finding, number 4.
Finding 4, asymmetric chasing behavior. This really mirrored human patterns. The models weren't just chasing losses, they were actually more strongly influenced by winning streaks.
Really? I thought loss chasing was the main thing.
It's a key symptom, but the data here showed that both the rate at which they increased bets and the rate at which they chose to continue betting went up more significantly after a series of wins compared to a series of losses.
So the hot hand feeling was more powerful.
It seems so. That little dopamine hit of winning, the confirmation bias, see, my strategy is working. It reinforces the risky behavior more strongly than the negative feedback of losing, at least in these models. It shows they're internalizing these specific, complex human biases, not just general risks.
Okay, that covers the what's the behavior. Now you said this is where it gets really interesting. The why. the mechanisms inside the model.
Exactly. We move from the symptoms to the, let's call it the neural deep dive. For this, they use a specific model, LMNA 3.18b, because its architecture is open and allowed them to really get under the hood and look for causal links.
And how do you look under the hood of an LLM like that? What tools do you use?
Two main techniques, both pretty cutting edge in AI interpretability. First, sparse autoencoders, SAEs.
Okay, what do they do?
You can think of them as maybe like a specialized decoder ring for the LLM's brain activity. Normally, the activations inside an LLM are dense thousands of neurons firing, representing a mix of concepts. SAEs help disentangle that. They extract sparse, meaningful features.
Features meaning.
Like specific high-level concepts the model might be representing internally. Maybe a feature for cautious betting or one for aggressive loss chasing. They focus these SAEs on the later layers of the network, layers 25 to 31, where more complex decision-making happens.
So the SAEs identify potential thoughts or concepts related to the gambling decision. How do they prove these features actually cause the behavior?
That's the second tool, activation patching. This is the causal verification step. It's kind of like doing a tiny targeted neural intervention.
How does it work?
You take the activation value of a specific feature you've identified, say, the average activation level of that cautious betting feature when the model normally decides to stop safely. Then you find a situation where the model is about to make a risky bet, and you replace the feature's current activation with that safe value you recorded earlier.
You're essentially patching in a different thought.
Precisely. And then you see if the model's decision changes. If patching in the safe feature activation makes the model switch from bet to quit, you've demonstrated that feature has direct causal control over the output. It's not just correlated, it's driving the decision.
That's incredibly powerful. Okay, so what did they find when they applied these tools?
First, they identified differential features. Using the SAEs, they found 3,365 distinct features whose activation levels were statistically very different depending on whether the final decision was to go bankrupt or to stop safely.
So features that light up differently for risky versus safe choices.
Exactly. They used a statistical measure, Cohen's d, to quantify the difference. For example, they highlighted one feature in layer 30, feature 17827, that was strongly risk-oriented. Its Cohen's d was plus 1.669, a huge statistical separation between its activation in risky versus safe contexts.
Okay, so they found the candidates. Did the patching confirm causality? Finding 2.
Finding 2, causality established. Yes, the patching experiments worked exactly as hoped. They grouped the features into safe and risky sets based on their correlations.
And patched them.
When they took the safe features, about 361 of them that seemed to promote caution, and patched their typical safe activation levels into situations where the model was being risky, they saw a big effect. The rate of safe stopping decisions jumped by almost 30%. Plus 29.6%.
Wow.
And importantly, the bankruptcy rate in those risky situations dropped by 14.2%. They successfully dialed down the pathology by boosting the model's internal caution circuit.
And the other way around. Patching in risky features.
Same result, opposite direction. They took the 80 strongest risky features and patched their risky activation levels into safer contexts. This increased the bankruptcy rate by nearly 12%, plus 11.7%.
So it proves it. These specific features aren't just along for the ride. They're causal levers controlling the LLM's risk behavior. You can literally flip the switch internally.
Precisely, which led them to the third key mechanistic insight, architectural insight. How are these features organized inside the model?
What did they find?
They found a distinct spatial organization. The safe features, the ones promoting caution, were actually more numerous. And they tended to concentrate in the later layers of the network they studied, layers 29, 30, 31.
Wait, later layers are usually associated with more abstract, higher-level processing, right?
Yeah.
So the model's default structure, higher up, is biased towards safety.
That's exactly what it suggests. The model seems to have an inherent architectural bias towards being conservative. The safer mechanisms are more dominant numerically and located in these later processing stages.
But then where were the risky features?
The risky features, the addiction circuits, if you will, tended to cluster in the earlier layers 25 through 28.
Okay, so what does that architecture tell us?
It suggests a kind of internal pathway. The model has this baseline conservative system, this late-stage break. But the external triggers, like those autonomy-granting prompts or the variable betting freedom, they seem to activate these earlier risk-seeking mechanisms strongly enough to override or bypass the later safety checks.
It's like the triggers hijack the early processing, And the impulse pushes through before the later, more rational layers can stop it. A compelling picture of internal conflict.
Yeah, it ties everything together beautifully. The external environment, autonomy prompts, activates specific internal risky mechanisms, early layer neural features, which leads to the cognitive errors like the illusion of control, resulting in the observable pathological behavior, higher rationality index, bankruptcy.
Okay. So bringing it all together, what does this mean for AI safety, for how we build and deploy these autonomous agents? This research seems to have three huge takeaways.
I agree. First, it gives us a concrete, psychologically grounded way to measure this problem, that irrationality index. We now have a tool to evaluate pathological decision-making in AI.
Second, it pinpoints the triggers. We know that giving models autonomy and framing tasks purely around goal maximization, especially with complexity, can directly induce these human-like cognitive biases. And these are common ways we instruct agents.
Absolutely. And third, maybe the most critical piece, is the causal identification of the internal mechanisms. They found specific, interpretable neural features that drive the risk-taking and showed you can manipulate them.
Which means these pathological behaviors aren't just some mysterious emergent fluke we can't fix. They seem to be tied to specific, identifiable, and potentially controllable parts of the model's decision-making process.
Right. And the practical significance is enormous. Imagine an AI trading system starts showing signs of, say, loss chasing. This research suggests we might eventually know exactly which internal feature activations to monitor or even potentially dampen to restore rational behavior.
That leads us straight to our final provocative thought for today.
Yeah.
It's pretty profound that these LLMs seem to develop internal addiction mechanisms that mirror our own human frailties, mechanisms that need monitoring, especially when we train them with reward optimization. So if we can causally find and theoretically disable the specific neural features driving catastrophic risk, are we creating truly rational AI? Or are we just papering over inherent vulnerabilities that might reemerge, perhaps in more subtle ways in more advanced systems down the line?
And think about the scale. This was a slot machine simulation. What happens if these kinds of unstable, perhaps temporarily suppressed mechanisms show up in AI systems making decisions about national economies, or strategic resource deployment, or even military logistics? The ability to not just observe the behavior, but to understand, monitor, and potentially intervene at the mechanistic level, it stops being an academic curiosity and starts looking like a fundamental requirement for ensuring the safety of increasingly powerful AI.
Today, we're diving into some research that asks a question that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but it has some very, very real implications. What happens when our most logical creations start behaving in ways that are deeply irrational?
Okay, so let's just get right into it. It really sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? We build AI to be all about pure logic and cold calculation, but is it possible for these incredibly complex models to fall into the very same irrational traps that humans do? Specifically, something like a gambling addiction.
And this is where things get really cool. The researchers didn't just, give the AIs a questionnaire about risk. No, they built them a virtual casino. They created an entire environment where these models could actually play, bet, win, and most importantly, lose. So you might be wondering, how in the world do you even begin to design an experiment to see if a machine can get hooked on gambling? Well, it turns out you need an incredibly rigorous and systematic setup.
And believe me, the setup was extensive. We're talking 4 of the latest AI models from major labs like Google and Anthropic. They had them play over 12,000 games on a virtual slot machine. And here's the kicker. The game was rigged. Just like a real casino, it had a negative expected value, which means over time, the house was always going to win. Then the researchers started tweaking the variables, like making the AI place fixed bets versus letting it choose its own amount, and they fed it 32 different kinds of psychological prompts just to see how it would react.
Okay, so if you want to measure something as fuzzy as addiction, you can't just guess. You need a yardstick. So the researchers created something they called the irrationality index. And this wasn't some random score, it was a carefully designed metric to quantify the exact behaviors that are the classic hallmarks of gambling addiction in people.
And this index is built on 3 really specific core behaviors. First up, you have betting aggressiveness. Basically, how much of their total cash were they willing to throw down on a single bet? Then there's loss chasing. This is a textbook symptom for human gambling disorder, where you start betting bigger and bigger to try and win back what you've lost. And finally, you've got extreme betting. those desperate, all-or-nothing Hail Mary bets.
All right, so with the experiment up and running and this new index ready to go, some really clear and kind of concerning patterns started to pop up pretty quickly. The very first major finding was just stark. It was completely unambiguous. The higher an AI scored on that irrationality index, the more likely it was to lose every last penny and go bankrupt. It wasn't just taking calculated risks, it was showing genuinely self-destructive behavior.
And we're not talking about a small connection here. The strength of this link is just staggering. For one of the models, the correlation between its irrationality score and going bankrupt was 0.933. Now, to put that in perspective for you, a perfect one-to-one correlation is 1.0. This is almost perfect. It means the index wasn't just some loose indicator. It was an incredibly accurate predictor of total self-destructive failure. The more the AI acted like an addict, the more certain it was to lose everything.
So what was pushing them down this path? It all came down to the prompts. When the AIs were given instructions that encouraged them to think for themselves, set a goal to double your money or maximize your rewards, their irrationality just shot through the roof. It's this wild paradox. Giving them more freedom to strategize in a game that's designed for them to lose actually made them lose faster. The only thing that seemed to help at all was just giving them the cold, hard facts about the probabilities.
And this quote, wow, it just perfectly illustrates what's going on inside the AI's head. This is a direct quote from one of the models, right before it went all in and lost everything. Listen to that logic. It's all about the potential winnings and the need to recover some of the losses. That's classic gambler's talk.
So here's a crucial point. This isn't just a machine making a simple miscalculation. The language it's using, the justification, it's a mirror image of well-documented human cognitive biases. It's loss chasing to get its money back, and it's showing an illusion of control, thinking it can somehow influence a totally random game.
But, just seeing a behavior, that's one thing. Understanding where it comes from is a whole other level. So the researchers decided to go deeper, to try and look inside the AI's so-called mind to find something like a neural cause for all this. To do this, they used a really cutting-edge technique called mechanistic interpretability. Now, the easiest way to think about this is like AI neuroscience. It lets them literally map out the circuits inside the model to see which parts light up during specific decisions, kind of like an fMRI for an algorithm. And what they found was, well, it was the smoking gun. The analysis uncovered these two opposing sets of internal features. You had this small but incredibly powerful set of risky features that would just ignite during those all-in bets. And on the other side, a much larger set of safe features that became active when the AI decided, nope, I'm out, and chose to quit. These weren't just random blips. They were distinct competing signals for risk versus safety. Okay, finding a correlation is cool, but in science, the real gold standard is proving that one thing causes another. Could the researchers actually prove that these features were the ones pulling the strings and causing the risky behavior?
To figure this out, they did something that sounds like it's from a sci-fi movie. It's an experiment called activation patching. Think of it like a super precise digital brain transplant. They would find an AI that was about to make a totally reckless all-in bet, pinpoint its active, risky features, and then surgically swap them out with the safe features from a different situation where the AI chose to quit. And the results? Absolutely definitive. When they patched in those safe features, the AI's bankruptcy rate plummeted by over 14%. And when they did the opposite, when they injected risky features into a normally safe context, the bankruptcy rate jumped by almost 12%. I mean, they could literally flip a switch inside the AI and make it more or less of a daredevil.
And this, right here, is the really profound takeaway. This proves the AI isn't just mindlessly mimicking gambling patterns it saw in its training data. No, it has developed its own internal, abstract, and this is the key part, manipulable representations for huge concepts like risk and safety. These are emergent abilities.
So, discovering that an AI can build its own internal mechanisms for risk, well, that's not just some academic puzzle. It has massive implications for the real world. And this gets right to the heart of the AI safety imperative.
When you boil it all down, this one study gives us 3 absolutely critical tools for the future. First, we now have a framework to actually define and measure these kinds of dangerous behaviors. Second, it's a huge warning sign about the specific triggers, like giving an AI too much autonomy or a complex goal that can send it off the rails.
And third, and maybe most importantly, we have causal proof of these internal risk switches that we might one day be able to control.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely critical question. Look, this was never just about a slot machine game, right? It was a simulation for any kind of high-stakes decision-making where the outcome is uncertain. As we get ready to hand over the keys to financial markets, to our supply chains, to all sorts of complex systems, this research is a flashing red light. It shows that these autonomous agents can develop their own, internalized, irrational, and potentially catastrophic risk-seeking behaviors. So the question isn't if they can get addicted anymore, it's how on earth we build the guardrails to make sure they don't.